So let's talk about node.js and creating your first server. I have Atom open here, my text editor, and building from my last project video that I shared a couple of days ago. I've got my server.js file, which just has a little console.log printout. And I've got over here on my left-hand side in the project tree view, you can see the structure of my web project. Again, if you're not familiar with this, you should go back and watch the last video. I've got this key file right here called server.js. This is the file that we're going to run using the node command. And this file right here is going to become our server, our web server, once we put some JavaScript code into it. And the rest of this stuff over here, these are the front-end files that I'm going to give to any client browser, for example, that comes knocking on my door and asks for index.html. Tonight we're going to write the server code to send these files. All right, you can see I have a terminal window open and I have Chrome open, ready to go as well in the background. So let's get down to it. So right off the bat, I'm going to start here in terminal. I'm going to go find my web project. Now this thing happens to be living on my desktop, and it's in the folder you can see is called My First Server. So let's see where I am. You can see I'm in my home directory. Let's list the files and folders there. You can see I have desktop as one of them. So again, from the last video, a couple of little Linux type Unix commands to get there. CD desktop, there we go. Now in the desktop folder, I'll search and you can see there's a lot of stuff there, but among the many things that I have there, I have this folder right there, My First Server. So let's go inside of it. And again, you don't have to type the whole thing. You can just hit a few letters and type tab. And we're in. Let's see. That's it. Yeah, there I am. Okay, you can see my server.js file right there. Just to make sure things are good, I'm going to type node server.js to run it, and it's going to run this line of code right here. No big deal, but it's good to check, yeah? Okay, there it is. This is my first web server using node.js. That's the log that's here. Notice, by the way, it's a console.log, but it doesn't print to the console that you're used to seeing on the side of your browser. That's this JavaScript console over here that you're used to looking at for errors. That's not what we're talking about because we're running a server-side program right now from our terminal. It actually is printing out here, right here in this console. So keep that in mind. Yeah, okay. All right, let's clear the screen to make some room. Back to here. Oh, by the way, one other thing I want to say quickly that I forgot to mention. Notice when this program runs, it prints out what I told it to print, and then it quits. It's over. You're back to the prompt, and that's the end of it, okay? Keep that in mind. It ran, and it ended. It exited, because that was it, okay? Because what you're going to see in a little while is when we actually run a server for real, we don't want it to do that. We don't want it to quit. We need it to continuously run in loop forever and ever, listening for incoming requests so we can give out the files. And it won't actually quit until we quit it, and that's going to become important. And I'm pointing that out now because I want you to pay attention. When we get to that point, you have to say to yourself, how do I stop my web server from running once it is already started? I don't want to run that thing forever, right? I don't want to just kind of have my computer sitting there as a server for an indefinite period of time. And I'll talk about some of the complications if you let that happen, and so on and so forth. So just a heads up on that. All right, but for now, it just quits because we don't have any code to keep it running. It's one line, it's a printout. Yeah, we're done. All right, let's get rid of it. Let's make it a real server file. So what do you have to do to do this? What's the actual code? There are many examples online. You can kind of just search my simple node server or my first node server. You can find lots of different examples of how to do it. Everything's a little bit different. There are different ways to do it. I'm going to show you the way that I like best, and it goes something like this. I'm going to put this code in relatively quickly. You can pause the video if you need to copy it, and at some point you do. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is put in this line of code. And what I'm doing here actually is I'm bringing into the fold a module known as Express. So Node by itself is a very small thing. It's streamlined. It doesn't have a whole lot of functionality built into it. And if you had to build everything from the base, it would be a lot more work. Fortunately, there are modules that are written in Node that do certain things for you. And Express is just one of those modules that you use all the time. It's almost like, why is it just not included to begin with? It's a little bit like having a kitchen without a refrigerator, right? What's the point in that? You don't have that, right? Every kitchen has a refrigerator. And I would pretty much say that for our purposes, every Node app uses Express. So one of the very first things that you do in a Node application, a server application, is you put in this statement, require Express. And what that's just doing, it's going and getting, think of Express as a library. I called it a module. If it makes more sense for you to call it a library, you can go ahead and do that. It's going and getting a whole lot of functionality in code, and it's bringing it in. It's requiring it in the context of this program. And I'm actually assigning a variable to that content. So var express equals require express. I can call this thing on the left-hand side anything I want to. I can rename this if I want to, anything. But this has to be exactly as you see it. All right, why would I do that? I don't know. So I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so that's the very first line. You're going to write that in pretty much all of your Node servers. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually initialize an app. All right, and the way we do this is we type var app equals express, like that. And so what we're doing there is it's like we're calling a constructor, and we're creating an instance of an express object, and we're assigning it to the variable app. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create something called I'm going to assign a port number. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail as to what ports are. You've probably heard a little bit about the concept of a port. You are probably familiar with the idea that most web traffic happens over what's called port 80. And you're probably also familiar with the fact that certain ports are blocked on networks, maybe at school or at a place that you work, so that certain services can't get through. Firewalls block ports. And the idea there is pretty simple. It's that internet traffic can be of different varieties. Some of the traffic has to do with web pages. Some of the traffic has to do with live streams for things like Google Meetings and things like that. And also gaming takes place right over the network. And all of those different types of data are different types of protocols, and they travel with different identities. A port is just a way of identifying what kind of traffic it is that you're talking about. Web traffic traditionally is what travels on what's known as port 80. Other types of traffic are on other port numbers. Some other famous port numbers are port 22, that's something known as the SSH traffic, or SSH port number. 21, that's FTP, or file transfer protocol. And there's a whole list of other ones that are out there. For our purposes, we have to assign a port number. We don't want to assign any of the ones that are used already by services that might be running on your computer. So we're just picking a really high number that I know is open and available. No services on this computer are communicating with the outside world on a port of 5,000. If it helps you to think of another analogy, you can think about ports as being a little bit like channels on a television set, a little bit like that. So what I'm saying right now is we need a broadcast channel. We need to have one, and I don't want it to be one that's already used, so I'm going to make up a big one, 5,000. Nobody uses 5,000, so we'll go ahead and do that. If it bothers you, you could make it something else. You could make it 6,000 or 3,000 or something, whatever you want. But I think when we're playing around with different port numbers, we tend to do that right there. Now I'm going to put a little caveat on that, something a little before that, and you may not understand exactly what and why I'm doing this, but I'm going to actually allow for two different possibilities here. I'm going to allow the port number to be something that's assigned by the system. Some systems that you might deploy this server on will actually have a variable set on the system. It's called an environment variable, and it will be called port, capital port. If that's already set on the system, then I would want to use that. This would be useful if, for example, you're going to take this whole web project and put it up on, I don't know, like Heroku, a cloud-based web hosting service, and they're going to actually specify the port that your server can run on, and you want to use it. All right, so I'm going to say, go ahead and use this if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then it'll default to 5,000. And this is just a way of, the or is just a way of basically saying, choose this unless it's null. And if it is, then choose 5,000. So right now, this is just going to default to 5,000. It's not important for our purposes. I could get rid of this right now. Everything I do from here on forward would work great. But in the future, especially if you want to take this thing and put it up in the cloud and host it on some actual service, this would be an important concept to have right here. So I'm going to leave it in. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my app object where the public files are. Where is the stuff that it should serve? And to do that, I'm just going to type in, actually paste in that line that I have right there. I'm saying, hey app, look at that syntax, right? Use the public directory. That's this thing over here. See over here on the left here? That's this stuff. This is the safe stuff that you can serve to any outside browser or AKA client that comes knocking for stuff. It's in /public. And this stuff before here is just the syntax of how you assign it. This is getting the path to that from the local directory that these files are in. All right, and the rest of this you can just kind of think of it as a sort of boilerplate code for the time being. If I had my files in a different location other than public, if I decided to just go rogue and make a different folder here instead of public, and I decided to call it private, which that would be a terrible thing to call it, but I could, then I would change this to that. All right, but nobody does that. It's best to just leave it as public. So again, that line has to be there. And then it's time to start the server. The code that actually starts the server looks like this: app.listen, right? Because again, the server is going to run and listen for incoming connections on the port that I've set above. That could just as well be hard-coded to 5,000 if I wanted to, but since we have the variable up here, I'm going to let it be. Okay, and then I get to type in a function, a callback function here, that I want to have run when the server runs. When it first runs, whatever I put here is what happens. So I'm just going to choose to log something at this point and say the server is running and, well, let's say waiting for traffic on port. And I could put in the variable at this point. I could say, kind of go back like this, right? And I could say plus port or something like that. But I know it's running on 5,000. I'm just going to type that in right there. Okay. That's just a message to me to let me know that the server is working and that it's running. That right there is the sum total of all the code that you need to have a basic web server that serves files from your public directory. That's it. That's all. Now, if you're Googling around looking for other examples of this, and if you already did this already, you may have seen that there is some other code that frequently gets written. Here's a block that you'll see from time to time. This is older code that you don't really need to use anymore, but I think it's worth mentioning what it's doing. So what this is basically saying is to the server, when you receive a GET request, and I talked a little bit about what a GET request was a few videos ago. So when a browser comes in and says, I want to get your resources, it says, if you get a GET request to the root, then you should send index.html. In other words, it's telling the server which file to send back to a client that comes knocking, asking for this root. And because for, I think, probably, how many years has it been since, I think things like this were standardized probably around 1995. So since then, it's been customary that whenever a browser comes to you and issues a GET request to your root in directory here, you just give it index.html. We don't need this anymore. This is just standard. If you can comment that right out, and what'll happen is as soon as any GET request comes in, it's just the default. We're just going to give them index.html. All right. If you have a file inside your public folder called index.html, then by default, because that's the way it's been for years and years and years, you're going to serve that file. And you don't actually technically need that. You can put this in if you want to, but it's not needed. Okay, all right, let's see a little bit about what's going on. Let's see it in action. Okay, I'm going to save that file and come back to my console. And get ready to, and let's run it. Let's see what happens. Let's see if we run our server. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so here we go. So I'm in the right place. I'm going to type in node server.js. Deep breath. Here we go. Hit the return key. Is it going to work? Is it going to work? It never works on the first try, right? I wouldn't be doing this if it did. There's got to be more to it. Okay, so here we go. Return. Oh, yeah. Error. Let's pay attention to the text of this error carefully. It says cannot find the module express. All right. That's too bad because, see, I need it right there, but I can't find it. I need it, but I can't find it. I don't have it. It's not here yet. All right. It doesn't ship with Node. You got to install it. And you can notice it's not here because look through these directories over here on the left here. You can see public, images, scripts, all that stuff. I don't see anything called Express. I don't see anything like that. Take a good look at the structure right here. Notice everything that's there because it's about to change in a minute. Okay, so what we have to do is now we have to actually take a minute and install Express into this project. This project needs some Express files to make it work. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to run something called the Node Package Manager. The Node Package Manager, npm for short. I'm going to type npm install Express. That's all you have to do. It's looking for Express, so I'm going to type in Node Package Manager, npm install Express. All right, and I'm going to hit return, and I'm just going to sit back and watch the magic. You can see you get a little status here, and it kind of says, oh, good, installed, we're good. A little message that I can update my npm utility if I want to. I'm not going to do that now. I get a couple of warnings, don't worry about those, but it's installed. I now have Express. And you can see if you come back to your project over here, some things have changed. For one, there's a new file up here, a new directory up here called node modules. All right, and if you just click to explore what's in there, there's all this stuff that you just got. That all came in on the install that we did over here in the terminal. You just have it all. And somewhere in here, let's see, let's look through it. We have Express. There it is. Now there's a lot of other stuff that came with it. The reason for that being that Express actually depends upon all this other stuff. So it's like a hierarchy or a chain of dependencies. So to have Express work, you actually need to have all this other stuff. But this npm utility install thing, this installer, it's smart and it knows, it has a list of all the things it needs to install to get Express to work. So it did that, and now you have all your stuff right here. Good to go. Okay, so that's great. Now the other thing that I have is a new file here called packagelock.json. And if I look at that, it's got some interesting information in there. I should have another file in here called package.json. I don't know where it is and why I don't have it. This should work nonetheless. But this is packagelock.json. And if you scroll down, there's all sorts of stuff in here. One of the things that's in here is information that Express is needed to run this project. It's kind of like a receipt or a bill of sales, or it's information about all the stuff that was installed to make this project work. Somewhere in here we should see Express. There it is, Express with the version number and all this other stuff. This is actually many of you will recognize immediately the data type that this is. This is all JSON. Right? It's just a big JSON file. It's even called that, packagelock.json. That shows information about the project. That got written when I did the install using this npm node package manager. All right, so a little tangent here, but that is something that you have to be aware of. When you start building web projects, you use this all the time. There are dozens of node modules that you will use other than Express. There's lots of them that add certain functionality to have your server do certain special things, and you're going to be installing them all the time here from the command line, and they're going to show up in your node modules folder, and you're going to get a little receipt that you installed them in here. And as I said, there's another file that I don't see. I should see package.json. I don't know why I'm not seeing it currently. I had it before, actually, when I ran this and built this before making the video, and then I deleted it manually, and that could have something to do with it. But anyway, I don't think that it's critical, at least for this example. So let's try it again. So back to the terminal. Here we go. All right. we'll just hit the up arrow. Remember, you can do that to get your last command. We'll hit return. There it is. And oh, you know what? My last command was my last command was npm install express. And I did that already. I don't want that. I want to go back again. There it is. Node server.js. Here we go. Run. Awesome. Okay, now check it out. There's my message, and I don't have a prompt back. In other words, I don't have my name and the directory I'm in and a blinking cursor. I can't type anything here. I'm literally, the server is it's running. The process is hung. It's continuing. I'm in what's known as an application run loop, and it's just on and on and on and on. The server is listening and listening and listening and listening. Okay, now there's no requests coming in for any web pages yet, so the server isn't doing anything, but it's on and it's listening. Okay, now how do I actually get it to serve a page to me? What do I have to do? Well, in a browser, in a typical address bar in a browser, you type in one of the following. You want to visit a server on your own local computer, a server that's hosted on your own local computer. So you literally type in localhost, but that's not enough. You have to put in a colon and then a 5000, because that's the port number. Remember, we ran it on 5000. So that's what you type. Okay, now you hit return, all right? And we get a blank page. There's nothing showing here, all right? There we actually have a little message, a little error message here that refers to something called a favicon not being present for the page, a little icon. Well, that's not really the issue. That's not important. We just have nothing showing in this blank page, all right? Why? Well, because we don't actually have anything in our HTML file. If I go to index.html, it's blank. So let's put some content there. So let's just kind of, real quickly and crude, let's just make the simplest homepage that we can. Now we'll put in a body like this, right? And let's just give it a paragraph tag. And we'll say, hello from the server that served this file. Like that. Make sure you save it. And you can actually go right back to your browser and just refresh the page. You don't have to restart the server. You don't have to come back to here and reboot it. Refresh there, and there it is. There's my page. All right, now that page has been officially served by this web server, this server.js file that is controlling the code here is controlling the service, the web server that gave me this HTML file. Right, now for some of you, you're like, well, how's that different than what I did before when I just sort of dragged files into my browser and looked at them? It's very different, okay? You're not, prior to this, when you looked at your HTML pages, you were just opening them up directly from the file system. Now you have a service running on your computer, an actual app that's running and listening for incoming requests from browsers on port 5000. And when it hears something, it actually sends back index.html. And realize you can put anything now that you've written previously inside of a public folder. So any projects that you have developed in the past, for be it a game that you made or canvas drawing things that you've done, and anything that you've up from the beginning of the course until now, you could put that inside this public directory with your scripts and your images and everything, and now your server will serve that file, that index.html file, to anybody that comes knocking here, localhost :5000. All right, I can also type in 127.0.0.1 :5000. That's just another way of getting there. That's the same address. That number, right, that IP address right there is the same thing as localhost. So whichever you prefer. Okay. And if I wanted somebody else in my house to be able to get this stuff from my computer, to be able to be served index.html, I could give them my IP address and they could type that in here and then get the file from me. If you're wondering how do you find your IP address, if you're on a Mac, at least the quickest way is to open up your network preferences and you can look through it, and you can see right here, you could, my particular address right now is 10.0.0.35. So if I wanted to give that address out to my wife or my kids and say, hey, you know what, open your browser and go to that, they would type in, instead of localhost, they would put in 10.0.0.35 like this, and then 5,000, and they would get the very same page for me. Is that going to work for me? Yeah, it actually works for me as well. Okay, I can do that as well. All right, and if I put in some other incorrect IP address, so if I decide to put a 7 there or something, and I say, well, give me something from that service, notice it just sort of times out. You can see this little spinning thing here, right? It's not giving me a new page. It says connecting, 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 and this is just here because it was here before, okay? But there's no server at that IP address. If I go back to the 35, then I can get it again, okay? So that's pretty cool, right? Now other people can see content on your computer that you're willing to give to them, content that you put in public in this folder. Now it's not going to work from out of your house, unfortunately, because your router, for the most part, your internet service providers will not allow incoming traffic through your router in this way to get to a server that may be running on some port like this in your house. It's very difficult to do that because most people have what's known as dynamic IP addresses for their homes anyway. So the actual IP address of your house, of your service, your internet service at your house, changes from time to time when you unplug your modem or you lose power. So you're not even always at the same IP address, from the outside world. It would be like as if your phone number to your house changed every so many days or so, right? And actually a lot of you have internet service that's like that. And so it would be difficult to imagine getting to computers in your house from outside your house if the address of your house is always changing, right? What you would really want for that is something called a static IP address that doesn't change. And you can pay for that with your service if you get a business plan with the cable people from Optimum Online or whoever it is that you have. All right, so this will work, like I said, in the house. It won't work, unfortunately, from outside. Now, there are ways to get around that, obviously, but that's another thing for another day. So that's how you see a site on your computer, all right? And I should also say that when you go to other websites normally and you go up here in the bar, you type in www.cnn.com and you hit go, what you're actually doing there is you're actually, without knowing it, you're actually typing in with an imaginary :80 at the end, because that's the port that web servers around the world are running on. And you see that takes you there too. You go to the very same place. But since the port 80 is just sort of defaulted, you don't have to put it in. If you were to go in and sort of type cnn.com:5000, well, that's not going to work. You can see it timing out. This thing just spins and spins and spins. It never gets there. Okay, because they're not listening on that port. They're listening on 80 at the CNN web server, just like everybody else. Okay, so that's a little bit about distinguishing between ports. We're going to work with 5,000 so as not to conflict with anything else. And you're going to be typing in, for all your purposes, localhost :5000 to get to your own server. All right. Now, finally, the last thing is we don't want to leave this thing running, okay? Because right now, if I were to close my MacBook and leave this server running, a couple of things could happen. One is when I opened it up a little while later, it could actually have quit. That's possible. But the other thing is the process could get hung, meaning that the server would still be listening on port 5000, but I might not be able to quit it anymore. And so I'd wind up in this interesting scenario where I had a server running that I could no longer access to quit. And there are ways around that. There are you can find processes that are running on your computer by name, and then you can kill them. You can find the process ID number and kill them, and that gets into a level of terminal and Unix shell stuff that you may not want to have to deal with. So to avoid problems like that, before you leave, before you shut down for the night or close your screen or anything else, quit your server. And the way to do that is to hit the control key. And I mean control. I don't mean like on a Mac command or any, the funny looking symbol next to the space bar. I mean control and C together. So control C, and notice it quits. All right, and that's it. Now, if I go back here and I try to go visit myself again, let's try to see the server. Server's not running, so it's not listening for anything. And I hit like that, and you just get this nice message: the site can't be reached because there is nothing running. Okay. Now, if you want to start it up again, then node server.js, you run it. It says, great, it's running. Yes, it is. Now I come back here and I refresh the page, and there it is. I see it again. Okay. Come back to here and quit it. Now, anytime you make a change to this server.js file, this file here, this guy here, any changes you make in this file, if you save them, to have it take effect, you actually have to quit and restart your server. Okay? So if you're wondering why, as we go on and we start making this a little more involved and adding some functionality to our servers, and if you're wondering like, well, nothing, no changes are happening, you have to actually quit the server.js. You have to stop this process from running and restart it for any of the changes in here to be enacted. However, remember I said before, if you start changing your index.html files and your JavaScripts and your images and your style sheets, you don't have to restart the server for those things to take effect, right? Because you can change those files at will when you ask the server to give you any of that content. Whatever's there, it will get given to you. Okay, so it's only if you change the server file here that you actually have to restart. If you find that frustrating, and as you start to write a lot of server code, it is frustrating because you're constantly saying Control-C and then restart, Control-C, node server.js. It gets old. If you find that annoying, you can actually download and install a little module known as node.mon. And I'm not sure if it's like that or one word. You can just Google it and find it. But it's short for node monitor. And what it does is it basically just it watches this file right here, and it says, you know what, anytime there's a save, any change that's made to this file, it automatically quits the node server process and restarts it for you without you having to come over here and type Control-C and then node server.js. It just does it like that. So if you find that, if that's the kind of thing that if you like automating things like that, you go ahead and you can install node.mon. You would do it right here from npm. You say npm install node.mon or something like that. All right, look it up. And I personally don't use it, but it definitely does speed things up a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so I think that's enough for now. That's a whole lot of input if you really think about what happened. I mean, I'll just recap quickly. I went through the whole concept of Express as a node module and adding functionality to Node. We don't even really know what Node is. I'm already talking about a module. All right. And then I wrote this code. I talked a little bit about what a port was, right? And the concept of the public directory. And then we ran it, right? And when running, we have to look at our server by typing in localhost and on the port we're running, in this case 5000. And we get the contents that are in index.html if we do that. And then don't forget to quit the server by hitting Control-C. So your job now is to go ahead and take, if you're in my class that is, and you're watching this, and I think that's many of you, then go get a project that you've already built for some in the past. Maybe, like I said, a game or a Canvas drawing or an About Me website or some such thing, and build it in this way. Take all the scripts and all the images and everything and put them inside of folders like this in a web project here with a server file just like this one, okay? And make sure that you have your homepage called index.html. Run your node server and then go visit your website from a browser, okay? And then the challenge beyond that is to get your IP address from, as I said, I get it most easily from my network preferences up here on a Mac, but I think from Windows you can go to your run prompt, type like ipconfig or something like that, or just look it up. You figure out how to get your IP address, and then give this to somebody else in your house that has a browser open, and have them type that in up here, that IP address with the port number after the colon, and then have them look at your website on their computer. And then when it's all done, don't forget to come over and quit with Control-C, your node server. All right, great. Let me know how it goes. Good luck. Thanks for watching.